Okay, so today we're going to talk about computing numerical summaries with our graphing calculator. And so here are all the directions for calculating numerical summaries and how to make your lists and stuff like that. We're going to go ahead and try and use a document camera and see if we can show you how to use it. So we're going to go ahead and take this information. We're going to go ahead and pop up our graphing calculator. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to work with our graphing calculator. So there are a couple buttons that you really need to be familiar with. The first one is our stat button, our statistics button. This allows us to do most of our statistics stuff. Down here we have the variable button, but right above it, it says distribution. And so this is like being able to analyze our different distributions. Really, it's kind of our probability menu. So we use it to calculate a lot of our probabilities, which we'll be doing later. Now, because it's in blue, usually to access it, we have to hit the blue second button and then hit it and allow us to do distribution. And then our third one up here is our stat plot. It's our statistics plots that we do. So our bar graphs, histograms, all that sort of stuff can be done in there. And we'll kind of take a look at that later. And then down here above 1, 2, and 3, we have a blue L1, blue L2, blue L3. These are our lists. And so anytime we're working with lists, we can hit the second blue button and then hit the 1, and that'll pop up L1. So here's my calculator. We're going to go ahead and we're going to enter in our males for list 1. So I hit stat. And we're going to go into edit, which will allow me to edit the lists. So in L1, I went ahead and I already entered in all the numbers. So if I wanted to enter in this number, I would actually type 154 and then hit enter. And you can see from my cursor that it moves down. And I do the same thing. And so here's all my males. And as I come to the end of my list, so as I move down, when it says 6, it's the 6th number of my data set. 7, 7th number of my data set. Now over here I have the females. And see blank, so if this one's blank and it says 23, that means there's 22 numbers above it. And so you can pause this and enter in the list. I highly recommend doing this yourself. The more you walk through this process, the more you just really learn how to do this. And now to calculate my numerical summaries, I'm going to hit the stat again, but now I'm going to go over to calc. So this is going to allow me to calculate a lot of different things. And because I'm measuring one thing, I'm just measuring the heights of these kids. It's a one variable stats. So I have one variable, we're going to calculate the statistics for it. Now I'm going to start with males. So for list, I'm going to look for L1. So I'm going to hit second 1, and that puts in L1. I'm going to hit enter. And we're not going to do a frequency list. We're going to talk later about frequency lists. We don't need it for now. And then I'm going to hit calculate. And look, it gives me all these wonderful things. So right here I have X bar, which is our mean. Here I have all the X values added up. I have all the X values squared and then added up. This is the standard deviation of a sample, a standard deviation of a population, because they are two different formulas. You do have two values. So you have to know if you're working with a sample or a population. N is how many items were in my sample. So I had 17 numbers in the sample. And then as I arrow down here, I can see my smallest number, my first quartile, my median, my third quartile, and my max number. And so I can enter all of this in on my sheet right here. Then, if I wanted to, I can now calculate the one variable stats for my second list. So I come to here, now I want list 2, so I'm going to hit second 2, and I'll calculate it for list 2. So here's the mean of my list 2, so on and so forth, and we can just arrow down and see all those values. So we're going to go ahead and enter that in right now on our lovely sheet of paper. As I get up from my chair and move over. So for our males, we had 17 data points. Our mean was 162.6, about, I rounded that. Our standard deviation was 21.55. Our minimum value was really small, 87. Our first quartile is 158. Our median is 165. Our third quartile is 175.5. And our max is 183. For our females, we had 22 data points. Our mean was 161.5. Our standard deviation is 5.2. Really different than from the males, much smaller spread. Our minimum was 152. Our first quartile is 158. Our median was 162. Our third quartile is 166. And our max was 169. So let me talk about that standard deviation. The standard deviation for males is so big because if you look at your range here for males, we go from 87 as a min to 183 as a max. That's 100 apart. That means it's really spread out, and the standard deviation is kind of showing that. But if we look at the females, 152 to 169, that's only 17 apart. So much smaller than almost 100. And so that's why we have a much smaller standard deviation for females. So now we're going to go ahead and check and see if there's outliers. So the first thing I need to do is do 1.5 IQR for males. So I'm going to do 1.5 times the IQR, so 175.5 minus 158. That gives me 17.5. I multiply that and I get 26.25. Now I'm going to take that first quartile, 158, and I'm going to subtract that 26.25. And this is going to give me my lower bound. If there's anything lower than this, it's going to be an outlier. So I get 131.75. So I'm going to look, are there any numbers lower than 131.75? Well, there are, because my minimum value is 87. So anything in that list that's lower than the 139.75 will be an outlier. So I'm going to look at my list. There's the 87. And I see nothing else lower. So 87 is an outlier. Okay, now we're going to look at the upper bound. So I'm going to take that 175.5 and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in that 26.25. So this gives me that upper bound and I get 201.75. So now when I look at my max, 183, that's not bigger than 201. So there's no numbers higher than 83, so there's no numbers higher than 201. No higher numbers than 183. I don't know if I said that one. So 83 or 87 is our only outlier for males. Now we're going to go ahead and look at females. So I'm going to do the 1.5 IQR. So 1.5 times 166 minus 158. So I subtract those quartiles and I get 8. So 1.5 times 8 is 12. So now I'm going to take that first quartile of 158. I'm going to subtract 12. And I get 146. So are there any numbers that are lower than 146 for the females? No, my lowest value is 152. So now I'm going to look at my third quartile, 166. Now I'm going to add 12 to find that upper bound. And so that's 178. Are there any values higher than 178? Well, no, because my highest value is 169. So there are no outliers for the females. So enjoy using your calculator for your numerical summaries, and we'll see you again to start talking about graphs.